What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and this one will break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to talk about SPY, Tesla, the QQQ, Nvda, and many tickers out there, and break down what the technicals are suggesting, and many other factors like that. Before I break anything down about all of this information, though, let me just mention a couple of things. Firstly, I am not a financial planner, so take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon, so check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. All right, guys, look at the market. We saw something very interesting develop. We saw SPY gap down during the pre-market before getting one more nice bounce. So we're going to be watching if something very similar happens again. However, I am eyeing something very interesting on SPY. It's looking like we could be forming a head and shoulders like structure already. And if you look at how the market moved for today, notice how we had this spike on Friday, right? Friday came, the market pumped quite nicely and came right back down after gapping up the way it did, right? So Friday we get this like nice pump and dump all the way back down to this level. Then we start another uptrend. The market was very sideways today for most of the day. Then we got this final pump at the very end after the US made a very important political decision involving other countries. So this news dropped involving that, how the US is planning on improving its diplomacy. And after the news dropped, the market got one big pump after forming this nice structure. So I also mentioned to you guys that there could be like a head and shoulders on SPY, but if we broke above 451.36, we're going to see this thing pump all the way up to 452. That's almost exactly where it went to once we got that break. So, you would have known the levels if you watched my intraday video if we did get the break, and we did get it, and that was your signal for a bullish move. After that happened, right? I just want to mention that we had a bearish divergence on SPY that continued to develop, but it didn't really play out yet. It may have started to play out at the very end of the day because the market rejected and started selling off, but it managed to hold above 450 at the very least. So what do I think is possible? There's a possibility that SPY formed a left shoulder right here. See how we got this pump and dump on Friday? This could be a nice left shoulder. We had this resistance zone right here in the 451s. We actually broke above it just a little bit higher before coming right back down. So this could be forming a second peak or a potential head. So we have a possible left shoulder, a possible head. And then what could be happening is we get a bit of a pullback tomorrow. And part of that could be because of some data dropping, maybe because of earnings. Because don't forget, we have Bank of America, Charles Schwab, and Morgan Stanley all reporting earnings in the morning tomorrow. So it's going to have a big effect on how the market ends up moving. So please be ready for that. I don't know if that's going to cause downside, not a guarantee. It's also possible we pump a little bit more. We could get one more pump before some more potential downside because the head may not be done forming just yet. So that's why this 452 level is going to be some very important resistance to watch for. Not to mention the previous resistance at 451.36. So I'm going to talk more about these specific levels in just a couple of minutes. We're going to be watching to see if we continue to form the head, if that is what's forming, or if the head's already done forming. We're going to see the market end up dumping from this point and then get one more bounce as we approach like Wednesday or Thursday. Maybe it has a lot to do with like IBM's earnings, Tesla's earnings coming out. We could get one more bounce in the markets before more downside later on, and we could be forming a potential head and shoulders like structure. Now, what else is interesting is we have a bearish amount of signals, which I want to talk about as well, which do suggest that either very soon or as we approach like, the end of this week going into next week, it is possible that the market may start dumping a bit. It's a possibility. Not saying it's going to be a crash. I'm not saying that whatsoever. I'm simply talking about, the market dropping a couple of dollars for a very healthy correction. That's a couple of points on SPX. And this is just a very healthy correction, a very, very healthy pullback, which I think is very possible. And I'm not talking about like a major correction. I mean like a very healthy pullback is what I meant to say. I think it's very possible and we could come down to fill this gap, but it's not going to happen immediately. It could take a couple of days or another week for it to finally happen because the market is once again very stubborn. And sometimes things like this happen with all these catalysts. So for tomorrow, I just want to remind you guys, we have some data dropping now. We have some industrial production numbers coming out at about 6:15 a.m. for me, or about 9:15 a.m. Eastern time for New York time. 15 minutes before the market opens, we have some data coming out. And after that, we have the manufacturing production, just some production numbers which are going to be important for supply chains here in the USA. Then we have business inventory numbers coming out a little bit later, which is not too significant. So the data is not that huge, but it's just worth mentioning. Could lead to some volatility in the morning. But the bigger thing for tomorrow in terms of our economic calendar is going to be the Fed speakers. We have two of them once again on At about 10 o'clock a.m. tomorrow, we have Barr from the Fed and Gibson in the Fed all speaking at 10 a.m. Eastern time for tomorrow. That's going to be important. So be on the lookout for what they end up saying. They're going to be speaking about the housing market index and other things about the monetary policy of the Fed, which once again could lead to more fluctuations. To add on to this, we have some more data dropping a little bit later on, which is not that big. For Wednesday, there's not much else coming out besides some building permits data. Then we have like initial jobless claims and the typical stuff. So there's not a whole lot of data dropping this week. It's actually a very weak week for data. What's going to be a lot bigger though is going to be earnings. So for tomorrow, like I said before, we have Bank of America before the market opens, Charles Schwab, Morgan Stanley, PNC, and some more banks reporting earnings before the market opens. This is going to be very important, so make sure you watch this very carefully. It could cause the market to like pump more, so maybe we pump a little bit higher. This could also happen tomorrow in the morning. Then the market may slowly downtrend, and it could be delayed if we are still forming this like head. And then this entire drop could happen over an extended period of time before we form the right shoulder. It could be something like this as well if the banks do very well and pump the markets. I'm just not 100% sure about how the banks will report earnings, but I'm leaning in the direction that we're in the process of forming like a head and shoulders like formation, some kind of topping formation that's going to eventually lead to downside over the next week. That's where I'm still leaning towards, and I'm still seeing that based off some signals I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. Anyways, going back to earnings, after the market closes tomorrow, we have Interactive Brokers. We have a couple of others like Pinnacle. Nothing too big after that, but then Wednesday is going to be the biggest day for earnings of the week, in my opinion, because we have Goldman Sachs reporting earnings. We have a couple of others like Ally Bank and the NASDAQ. And then after the market closes, we have Tesla, we have Netflix, we have United, we have IBM. That's a big one. Lots of those big earnings are going to be coming out for Wednesday after the market closes, especially Tesla. Make sure you are ready for that. For Thursday, we have just a couple of others, and then Friday's no different. So this is all going to be very important. So watch for these earnings. They're going to cause more volatility. Now, going back to my Webull account, I just want to mention that I have some very important levels to watch for on SPY. So I'm going to be unbiased when I say this. If there is more upside, the most important levels are going to be around 451.36, which was the previous high we made during this pump on Friday, and then 452 as resistance. Those are some important levels. Break above that, then we're going to be watching 452.5 to 452.69, the entire zone right there in the mid, 452s. And then above that, we're going to be watching 453.5 all the way up there if we do manage to break that. Do I think we're going to go that high? I really don't think it's going to go that high, but just to be safe, always be prepared. Now, if we do break down, we have support around 450, 449.5, 449 flat, 448.71, and then 448.5, all very important levels. But the most important level is going to be this one. If we get a very clean break below this 448 level, the next level is going to be 447.3. If we break below these levels, we're likely going to see the gap get filled. It's very likely we're going to come all the way down to the 446s if we do break below 448. Just wanted to make that clear. That's like the more significant support, but we do have minor levels if you are a scalper, if you want to look at this more meticulously. But what do I think is going to happen? Like I said before, we either pump a little bit more thanks to the bank earnings, then we just start dropping to form like our head and shoulders, or we're already done with the pump and the head is in and we're just going to come down, try to get bounced one more time for a right shoulder, and then just start to tank from there, just for a very healthy pullback. So once again, it's going to look something like this is what I'm anticipating. Either the top is in for the head and we get something like this where the market just starts downtrending already, or what could be happening is we form one more high thanks to the bank earnings, and that forms the head for us, and then we come right back down from a right shoulder, and then we're ready to just start downtrending as we approach the end of this week or going into like next week. That's what I'm seeing for SPY. I think this is very likely, but always be prepared by looking at different levels and confirmation levels and things like that. Now for Tesla, this is a little bit different from the market. Tesla held up very nicely. Let me just remove these drawings just so that it's easier to see. Tesla's on a clear uptrend. It's been making higher highs and higher lows, looking relatively strong compared to the market. For tomorrow, if the market does pull back because of the banks or something like that, we could see this slow Tesla down in the pre-market, but then we could see Tesla pop because Tesla's going back to what it was doing before. It tends to pop when the market opens. It's been doing this for the last couple of days. So we might see another pop by market open, try to get closer to 292. If we break it, I could see 295 on Tesla still. My only concern about Tesla, and there is something that is affecting it, the overall market could affect it to some degree, and then also the news. The news has been quite negative about Tesla with that whole SEC investigation thing incited by a particular politician, and also because of all the negative analysts talking about Tesla's margins. So kind of mixed with Tesla when it comes to the news, but I do believe it's going to try to pop again. We're going to be watching for 292. If that breaks, it could get very close to 295. Then it may slow down as time goes on, but still hold up overall. And I'm going to be expecting this thing to hold up quite nicely. I don't see it dumping very hard. I just think it's going to trade a little sideways, but try to hold up for the most part and try to remain around the 290s for tomorrow and also for Wednesday. But then after that, earnings will cause a much bigger move, and we will see what happens after that. For Aapl, we got rejected off this like 194.32 level. It is still holding up nicely. It's holding up better than the overall market. But one thing that is worth mentioning is the fact that we have this nice like accumulation structure, and we have a potential inverse head and shoulders. We could see Aapl trying to pump a little bit more thanks to these bank earnings. But the thing is, this head and shoulders, or this inverse head and shoulders formation, has this resistance around this 194 level, which is very close to where Aapl has been. So that's basically where Aapl has been. It's at resistance right now. If it breaks 194 and holds above it tomorrow, it could be going all the way up to about 196. That's a possibility. If it fails to do so, it's going to come all the way back down to 192.5 and then potentially back down to 191. So we're going to be watching how does this thing react to 194. From a technical standpoint, it technically looked bullish today. I mean, we're not really getting too many bearish signals on Aapl specifically, but just to be safe, the earnings will affect it and we will see what happens. For the triple Q, it's the same thing with SPY. It's the same analysis as SPY, in my opinion. We have this gap down here at 373, which I think could get tested over the next week or so, but we need confirmation before being more fixated on that, such as getting like a break below the 50 EMA in the 1 hour time frame. That would give us more confirmation of this break to the downside. We don't really have enough confirmation just yet, but it could be forming a left shoulder. A head could be forming. Maybe it's already done or it's going to be done later on. And then a right shoulder could form later on before it comes down. What do I think? I think there are two possibilities. Maybe it's going to come down tomorrow in the pre-market. Maybe it drops a little bit because of the bank earnings, retests 378 to 379, then it bounces one more time to form a right shoulder. So just like SPY, the right shoulder forms in the 382s, then we start to sell off and we come down to fill this gap. I'm leaning in that direction. There's also a possibility we pump up because of the banks, and we could see this thing go all the way up to this like 385 area if it breaks above 384. And then it forms its top there and it comes right back down, and then it continues with the whole head and shoulders formation. It's got to be one of those two. Now, for specific levels, let's just eliminate our bias and just look at this in a very unbiased way. The bulls are going to be watching 383.5. If we break that, watch 384, then 385. If we fail to do so and we start coming down, you'll be watching this thing come all the way down to this 381 zone around there, then there's 380.5, then 380, some very tight support zones. If it breaks below 380, you're going to be watching how does it react to this like 50 EMA level. It's going to come very close to it around this 378 to 379 zone around here. If it breaks below that, it's going to get a rug pull and come all the way down, in my opinion, to about 375 probably. It's probably going to break down pretty hard if it does break the 50 all the way down here. So that's going to be our very important support on the 1 hour time frame. So watch these levels carefully. I'm leaning direction that's in the topping process. Either it pumps a little bit more to finish the head, then it starts dumping and forms like a right shoulder, or the top is in and it's going to start dumping as soon as tomorrow. Then it pumps later for the right shoulder and then it just like starts tanking. So I'm going to be watching a head and shoulder formation. We're going to see if the head is done forming or if it's going to like continue to form, and that's going to dictate how the market moves, in my opinion. For Nvda, I think it's going to be dictated by the market. Got a very nice bounce today after we got some bullish news involving another price upgrade for Nvda, bouncing off 450 again. If you're bearish, you want to see it come all the way below 460 to retest 455. If it breaks the 50, it's going to come all the way down to the 442 level or so, if it breaks below 450. If you're bullish on Nvda, you want to see this thing make its way all the way up to this high at 470. If that breaks, it's going to retest 475, then potentially 478, then 480. What do I think about Nvda? This is my view on Nvda. With the market dropping, it may cause Nvda to come down in the future. We may get a retest of 455 tomorrow, then try to bounce off that. If it does break down, I could see it come back to the 450s, if not 440 or so, if it breaks down hard because of the markets. But that's completely fine, regardless of how low it goes, whether 450 is the low or not. I think this thing is going to fly for $500. $500 sometime in August. That's my target. That's a big move. If you look at it, we're only in the 460s. That's a pretty bold prediction I have, and I think it's going to come true when we approach earnings. That's my view of Nvidia. I don't care how low it goes. If it's 450, 440, it does not matter. The big move is going to be the upside once we approach earnings, in my opinion. Microsoft held quite decently, pretty sideways. If you're bearish, watch 434. I'm sorry, 343. Sorry about that, guys. If you're bullish, you're going to be watching 346. If it breaks above that, you're going to be watching this thing go all the way up to 348. And if that breaks, 350 could come. What do I think it's going to do? I think it's going to remain kind of sideways, be kind of stuck between 346 and like 343.8. Go back and forth for an extended period of time before picking another direction. That's all I'm seeing from it. It's not a whole lot. AMD, I told you I was leaning more bullish on AMD. I told you it might come down to hit this level and try to hold up, but I told you ultimately I'm leaning more bullish on it. I said that yesterday because of these imbalances up here. We have these imbalances up here. We have a bullish potential accumulation structure. I'm going to go on the 4-hour time frame for this. Just looking at it, you could see we're actually on an uptrend right now. Technicals are looking a little bit better than many stocks out there. And we have these imbalances up here in the 125 area, the 120s. I think we might see an uptrend on AMD, and eventually it's going to make its way up to about 125. Could it cool off a little bit tomorrow because of the market? Sure, it could get a back test of like 115, then bounce again, but I could see this thing pumping for 125 very soon. For Netflix, if you're bullish, you want to see this thing break above this resistance right here, just about at 452.8. If it manages to break this area, watch 455, 460. And if it breaks that, it's going to make a new high from this uptrend it's had. So we could see, like, for example, 462.5, then 465. If it breaks down, however, you're going to be watching a retest of the 50. I think it's going to come down to retest the 50, but then trade kind of sideways for a while. I think it might kind of come down just a little bit, maybe come very close to like 445, then bounce and just try to hold up. But I think it's going to outperform the market approaching earnings, and we're going to likely see this thing try to hold in the 450s after that. So maybe a slight drop tomorrow, then a nice bounce. And overall, I think it's going to hold up quite decently because earnings is coming very soon, and we could see it pump very close to it. For the NASDAQ, once again, it held up today, but don't forget about these gaps down here. And there's also a potential or possible like head and shoulders like structure that could be developing like right here. I'm sorry, I was zooming out too much. I'm so sorry about that, guys. It's right here. So we have like this left shoulder potential head forming, very similar to that of the QQQ, of course. If that ends up being the case, it could come down to start filling some of these gaps, but for confirmation, we need to see it break below our 50 and 14,000 area. There's no confirmation yet, but there is a possibility. SPX could also be forming the same thing. There's a bearish divergence that has been forming, but there's no confirmation of it breaking down just yet. If it does break down, you're going to be watching, could this thing break below 44.90? If that's the case, it's going to fill this gap all the way down to 44.73. If it breaks below support at 44.64, it's going to come all the way down to the lower 4400s to fill this gap down here. Now, just like SPY, we have this potential, head and shoulder structure right here, right? You could argue that we have this left shoulder here from Friday. We have this head right here. And that could cause this thing to come all the way down to like the lowest down here. So it could be forming that. I think it's easier to see on the 1 hour time frame. Hopefully it's not like unclear. So like I said before, we have this potential left shoulder, a head forming. I don't know if it's going to pump a little bit more to finish the head or if it's done pumping and the head is formed. That depends on the bank earnings. But there is this negative divergence, and that tells me we're going to likely see some downside tomorrow. One more bounce for the right shoulder, and then that's it. We're going to see a lot more downside. I'm leaning more in that direction, just like SPY. The dollar is pretty flat. It's trying to base around here. If the dollar does get a bounce, it starts pushing more. That's going to cause the market to once again slow down. So we're going to be watching if that ends up being the case. For Coinbase, it's just very flat right now, trying to hold between 101 and around 110, basically. It's just stuck between those levels, going back and forth, but it does have a slight downward thrust to it. If it breaks below 101, that's our 50 EMA, it's going to come all the way down, in my opinion, to about this 95 area. If it manages to break above 110, we're going to be watching 112 and 114. What do I think it's going to do? I think it's going to be very choppy and sideways for an extended period of time before it makes a bigger move after more tech earnings come out. So I'm just seeing very sideways price action for the time being for it. For Google, this thing, once again, is very sideways as well. It's looking a little bit more bearish, forming this negative divergence. I'm going to be watching 124 for Google. If that breaks, it's going to come all the way down to about 122.5. We actually have the levels like right here. So we're going to be watching these levels very carefully. There's 123, then 122.5 if it breaks below our 50 EMA. If you're bullish, you want to see it retest 127, then break above that to get to 129 to 130. What do I think is more likely? I'm leaning a little bit more bearish on it, just looking at the structure. You could see it had this divergence that formed a negative one, and on top of that, it's starting to downtrend a bit. So it looks like it's going to retest 124 at the very least, and potentially 123. For Amazon, it's also looking a little bit weaker. You could see it form this negative divergence, started to cool off a little bit, and now we're watching to see how it reacts to the 50. It's trying to hold the 50. If it breaks below it, watch 132, then potentially 130.81. If you're bullish, you're going to be watching 134.7, then 137. I'm sorry, 136.09 after that, then potentially 137. What do I think is more likely? I think Amazon's going to try to bounce in the pre-market and come right back down. But this structure is still looking bearish, and there's no true sign of a real bounce. I think it might try to bounce in the pre-market just temporarily, then come right back down. But the reason I say that is because it's trying to base around the 50 EMA, but there's no true confirmation yet. I just believe it's going to try to do that before it continues to drop. And if it drops, you're going to be watching 132, then potentially 130.81 on Amazon. You could even argue it as like a head and shoulders like structure. We have a potential head at 136.64. Just a possibility, but it's just worth noting. When it comes to Meta, like I said before about Meta, on the 4-hour time frame, our most important support on this thing is the 50 EMA. Why do I say that? Because zoom out of the chart, look at the last few months on Meta. Notice something very interesting. This yellow line I have is our 50 EMA. It's been like bouncing off of this for months and months and months since May, since like April actually. It's been very close to it. It did drop below it temporarily in April before bouncing above it, but for many months, for many months and many weeks, it's been above the 50 EMA, bouncing off it like a ping pong. I believe it's going to do something very similar. I think Meta could be forming kind of like a distribution phase right here. This could be resembling kind of like an inverse cup and handle, and we might see it eventually retest the 50 EMA. So I could see it drop a little bit more because of the market to retest about 300, but then it's going to likely try to bounce. Why do I say that? Because it's been making lower highs and lower lows if you look at the trend. So I'm going to be watching for a potential drop or retest of the 50, then a bounce after that. We're going to see how it moves after that. But for now, like I said before, for tomorrow, we might see it just trade a little sideways and eventually slow down a bit. If you're bullish, you want to see it break above 312.5, and then if it breaks that, it has potential to go all the way up to about 314 to 316. If you're bearish, you want to see it retest 307. If that fails, let's watch 304.7, then potentially a retest of 300 flat. What do I think is more likely? I think it's going to try to pop a little bit more and likely start to downtrend a little bit and eventually make its way down to the 50, then get a nice bounce off the 50 EMA around this 300 level. That's what I'm leaning towards. I am seeing a possible inverse cup and handle forming, but I think it's going to bounce once it hits that. So there could be a little bit more downside before a nice bounce. Overall, quite a nice structure on it. So am I a bear or bull in this market? The answer is neither. I'm not ever a true bear or bull because I simply look at what the chart tells us. For the last few weeks, I've been leaning more bullish in the markets. I've been talking about upside over and over again, these squeezes. And if you notice, the market's been pumping a lot. Now I'm starting to turn in direction that we may see downside, but I'm not saying it's going to happen immediately. It could take a while for the downside to really come, like another week, another couple of days for the real downside. But I do think that's going to come very soon as the market is due for it. That's the direction I'm leaning in, but I don't think it's going to be a crash. I'm not calling a crash or anything like that. I'm just calling a very healthy pullback to fill some of these gaps before the market bounces once again. 444 is going to be an important level, if not 442 to 443. And then if we eventually test this by like next week or so, I could still see a very nice bounce. Okay, that's what I'm leaning towards. But until all of that price action comes, please stay strong and be ready for some big earnings for tomorrow. Once again, we have Bank of America, Charles Schwab, and Morgan Stanley reporting earnings before the market opens with a couple of other banks. Get ready and do what you have to do. Remain calm, cool, and collected, and I'll see you guys in the next one. The market to the moon as the long term is still incredibly bright, and peace out.